Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and in today's video, we'll be talking more about corruption gear for patch 8.3. Corruption gear, if you weren't aware, is going to be the biggest system that will be replacing Titan Forging and Warforging going forward into patch 8.3. And if Blizzard is able to nail this system in patch 8.3, this will most likely be a very similar system, or at least a basis for a future system come Shadowlands in terms of how we get random upgrades for gear. Instead of getting a random upgrade of item level or sockets in your gear, instead you'll get a corruption effect, which will have some negative bonuses but also some positive ones. So the idea is to manage a set amount of corruption as a number that will be applied to your character, try to reduce it everywhere you can, and then utilizing only the most needed corruption effects in order to not fall behind on your character, whether you die to corruption effects or they simply reduce your effectiveness. In patch 8.3, Blizzard will be doing a little bit more tinkering when it comes to corruption, and this system is very important for 8.3 to happen. This is one of the bigger updates for the system, and a lot of people have been given their opinions of how bad corruption is at first, and have been given constructive criticism, which Blizzard has taken all too hard, and been updating and changing corruption every other iteration in patch 8.3. Some of the updates for corruption effects in 8.3 is going to be removal of certain affixes that Blizzard decided that are not that great in terms of receiving the corruption. And these are mostly going to deal with tank effectiveness. First, we have a corruption effect where a total certain amount of percentage of your health regeneration will continue during combat. Which normally your character has a decent amount of health regeneration outside of combat, but this will basically continue while you're fighting. That effect has been removed. There's also another effect that reduces your damage taken from periodic effects by a certain amount. Lots of tanks could actually utilize this in Mythic Plus dungeons and raids in order to deal with certain mechanics where a powerful damage over time ability would obliterate them. That effect has also been removed. Another one increases your healing received from all sources by an X amount. This would have been pretty insane when it comes to 5v5-1v1 duels that we do here on the channel. Imagine loading up with a bunch of healing increase on your gear and basically being unstoppable when it comes to surviving other classes. This would also allow certain tanks to go for specific pieces of loot in order to survive certain boss encounters. This effect also has been removed. When you think about it, it does seem unfair that Blizzard is removing all these positive effects that would help tanks. But it does seem like these effects would be very, very negative when it comes to you being a DPS or a healer and getting one of these. I mean, in Mythic Pluses or maybe in certain duel situations or PvP, some of these effects would be insane. Imagine walking into a Shadow Priest or an Affliction Warlock in an arena and you're head to toe with decrease of periodic damage effects to the point where that class simply just does 0 damage to you with their damage over time abilities, which is where most of the damage comes from. But imagine being a healer or a DPS and getting one of these affixes on your pieces of loot. So as a rogue, to have a certain amount of health regeneration to continue during combat might sound nice if your healer is just not healing you at all, or you're in a tough situation in the battleground where there's literally no healing whatsoever, but I highly doubt health regeneration during combat is going to make a massive play or save your life. Every one of these affixes for corruption could be specifically good in a very specific situation, but most of the situations we can dream of. So while it might be nice for a tank to be able to have extra healing increased, for a mage to have more healing increased for them would be basically not worth, unless you're strictly PvPing. So Blizzard decided to standardize a lot of their corruption elements. This is good because imagine if you got a piece of gear that, let's say you finally got a piece that's corrupted and maybe everybody else has some insanely cool corruption effects that help their class and you get like reduced damage that you take from dots. That would just feel so silly as a DPS. You would feel like that's not a reward, that's not an upgrade, it's just some random bonus, and at that point you are definitely going to go cleanse it. The whole corruption effect is supposed to be make you choose and make you decide and figure out whether the piece of gear is needed without the corruption or with. Can you utilize the corruption in a certain way, or do you like the stats on their own? But having really bad corruptions will be a guarantee that that piece of gear might as well just get cleansed because the corruption bonus is just going to be not worth. So out of all possible corruptions that can be applied to your piece of loot, you have avoidance, which will increase your avoidance equal to a certain percent of your haste, a increase for all haste sources, mastery sources, crit sources, versatility sources, extra leech on your gear, crit damage and healing increases, as well as glimpse of clarity. which some classes would love. Like a Retribution Paladin would love Glimpse of Clarity. Glimpse of Clarity, if you do get it on your piece of loot, has an effect of your spells and abilities have a chance to grant you a Glimpse of Clarity, reducing the cooldown of your next one spell cast by 3 seconds. Imagine being a class that has a lot of cooldowns to a bunch of their abilities, like, I think the best example would be a Retribution Paladin. If you don't know how Retribution Paladins play, their basic rotational abilities all have a certain amount of cooldown. Crusader Strike has a cooldown to it, and a couple charges. Judgment has a cooldown, Bladed Justice has a cooldown, and any of the other talent abilities that might be incorporated into rotation all have a cooldown. So imagine if you're throwing your Judgments, Blades of Justice, Crusader Strikes, and you are able to get those abilities just slightly faster instead of having to wait for certain procs. I think stuff like that would be really cool. Also, the affix itself can proc randomly from other abilities, so like a Fire Mage would be able to sink some Fire Blasts during that. There are other classes that will be able to use certain abilities that usually have a cooldown attached to them during those Glimpses of Clarity procs, but it won't be one of those traits and affixes that's just a default insanely good go-to, which I think is what Blizzard was trying to do with these corruption affixes. The corruptions are supposed to be an interesting mechanic, an interesting bit of gameplay to your pieces of loot. They might be impactful, major or minor, to your playstyle. And sometimes the corruption might not even be worth winning, because corruption will be a number you'll have to manage. Pretty sure someone will figure out a specific number of corruption you need, since every piece of gear comes with a set amount of corruption, like plus 50 corruption, plus 35 corruption, plus 20, plus 5. The number can vary, but definitely the more corruption it has, the stronger the bonus effect will be. So not everyone is going to run around with full corruption gear. In fact, most of you guys will try to keep your corruption under a certain maximum in order to not impact yourself in terms of your gameplay, in order to stay efficient as a healer, tank, or DPS. So the corruption gear needs to be good, but it can be so good that people are just having to play the lottery of it. Some corruption effects are going to be stronger than others, don't get me wrong, but it seems that with the way that they have it set up, most of the effects are, I feel like, a really close call whether they're busted or whether they're just right in terms of balancing. And with all these recent changes that Blizzard has done to corruption gear, it also should be stated that just about every piece of gear can get a corruption effect, whether it comes from your raids to mythic pluses to dungeons. And this is why it's very important for Blizzard to be able to nail this corruption gear going into patch 8.3. It seems like it's going to be a massive aspect, and I have a feeling in the back of my head this is something, or a similar system just with a different name, is what we will see replacing the whole Titan forging upgrades when it comes to Shadowlands. The current Titan forging system of getting sockets and higher item level pieces of gear just at a complete random isn't a perfect system, but something got to replace it. I'm perfectly fine with it having some RNG element to it, because in some senses RNG can be quite fun. It can be quite fun to be surprised by something cool, but RNG cannot be the sole way to get something you need. You should have ways to work for it, and that's what Blizzard decided to add certain things like corruption gear. Should be good, but it shouldn't be the craziest thing ever. Sockets, you can actually buy them and slot them on pieces of gear that you like. Gear no longer is going to be Titan forging and upgrading to a randomly high item level even inside of LFR, which gives back meaning to high-end Mythic Plus dungeons, high-end raid tier bosses on Mythic, as well as high-level PvP scenarios, primarily arenas. Which so far, the patch 8.3, I feel like has done very good things, and we're going to be paying attention to how things are going to go in terms of itemization and gear, and which certain of these affixes are going to be the strongest for corruption. But so far, this is everything we have for patch 8.3. Again, my hopes are this corruption system will be really good. I don't know what else could Blizzard add to the corruption system. I might mention it in a video or two, but I think I covered just about everything that is new and important about corruption as it's starting to finally take form. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed. You guys let me know in the comments below what are your thoughts about corruption, and I'll see all of you in another video.